A few weeks ago, I wanted to see how this character Blue Poison would look with bold graphics and thick lines, so this is how I did. To do this, I studied the art style of one of my favorite artists, Kuroblood, to learn what stands out and what makes Kuroblood's artwork so good. So I'm going to go over all of my notes and where I used them in my speed painting to show how I draw this in a bold style with thick outlines and saturated colors. So let's begin. The first thing I did was look at the main features of Kuroblood's works. Many of these can be divided into two categories, a style with clustered elements and thick line art, or thin line art with detailed shadows in a background. But the goal is to draw boldly, in a way that catches attention, so I chose to study category A. Here, the thick line art stands out and bright, saturated colors are used everywhere. The simple shadows with little to no soft edges also contribute to simplifying the shapes in the image, making them stand out more. I started with the rough sketch, trying to emulate these compositions. With these works, Kuroblood's characters look like they are floating, with a bunch of props overlapping behind them related to the character. The poses have a clear and simple direction. These compositions not only show what the characters are about, but both the fact that the characters are off-censored and because there are so many props with different sizes add to creating interesting compositions. As the character I am drawing, Blue Poison, has a reference image, I already know what props I'm putting in the background, being the bench, suitcase, punching bag, and plants. But one thing I did add to get a more Kuroblood-like style is that instead of drawing a more realistic frog, I simplified them to these, which look more like simple frog plushies. Kuroblood's animals are heavily stylized, and the animals look more fierce to match the fierceness of the characters. So I wanted a style that matches how cute this character is, which is why I went with the plushie frog. For the actual line art, Kuroblood typically uses these shapes. The hair is puffy, but not with many hard curves, but instead with lots of strategically placed straight lines or very slight curves. So when adding details, I made sure to use lots of straight lines to emulate this. In this bold style, I found that Kuroblood has a very limited bright palette shared between the character and the background, using the analogous color scheme, meaning colors that stand beside each other on the color wheel. So since the character has a lot of blue in their design, I focused on an analogous color scheme, this time centered around blue, using blue, green, and purple with a little bit of red. Looking at Kuroblood's shadows, aside from being defined with hard edges, it almost looks like multiply layers are being used. In digital art, many programs allow for you to draw on many layers, organized by what is on top and what is below. And the simplest form of layers are normal layers, where you simply paint whatever color you are using from the color wheel. However, you can change the layer mode so the colors you are painting with change depending on the colors on the layer below. This is called using layer modes, since you are changing the mode of the layer from the normal mode to whatever you choose from the list, such as multiply. There are many ways to use multiply layers, but what I am doing here is that I am laying the base colors of each material first, or what each material looks like in the light. The benefit of using multiply layers is that because they make the colors you use on the layer transparent and the color changes depending on the colors of the layers below but maintains the value of darkness, you can use one color for all of the shadows, saving brain power and time. Here, I am using purple as the shadow color, but many people use different colors for their shadows to match the rest of the colors in their image, such as pink, dark orange, or gray. I chose purple since it warms this mostly blue palette. Using layer modes also has other benefits. For one, layer modes are non-destructive, which means you can change the edges and color easily without permanently affecting the layers below. It allows for adjustments at any time. As you can see here, I go back to add some saturated orange to give more life to the skin by alpha locking the multiply layer and brushing it over with a soft brush. And I added some more blue for a gradient in the shadow. The trouble with multiply layers is that, let's say you want to extend the shadows with the same color. You can't just color pick from what is displayed on the canvas. You have to color pick from the multiply layer directly, because what you are seeing on the canvas is different from the actual color you used on the layer. The long way is to turn the layer back to normal mode, color pick from there and then turn it back. But the smart way is to change your eyedropper's color pick setting from pick from display to pick from layer. Because using multiply layers is a very easy way to defy the process of coloring into the base and shadows, and is an easy way to unify the image by changing the overall color and mood, you see it used a lot when people draw backgrounds. I'm willing to bet that they use it here for Arknight story backgrounds, which is why I wanted to experiment with using them this time. After placing the main colors, I then place the shadows. In fact, you can do the opposite, where you draw the shadows first in black and white, and then use multiply to then add color, but the premise is the same. Separate the process of drawing shadows and choosing colors to save some brain cells. After getting the general colors down and adjusting them using level curves, I then refined the image with thin lines, adding even more detail. I studied that a lot of the folds in Kuroblood's works are straight lines, with a few recognizable shapes to simplify. So I used these when drawing the folds of the clothes here. And I made the shoes with much more straight lines than the original to keep with the style. Now, using my refined line art, I blocked in the empty parts and erased the parts of the painting outside of the lines to clean the flats and the shadows. I am going with the multiply layer and a thin gouache brush for the texture in the hair. And again, I alpha locked the multiply layer and lightened the parts of the shadow closest to the light source for some more gradation, using the thin gouache brush and the soft brush to soften some of the edges. Then I focused on the face, brightening the eyes. And I started on the thick final line art. Kuroblood's art uses colored line art, so I changed the color of the lines depending on the parts I was coloring. But since the line art really stood out for me, for most of the image I did stick to an off black. Again, I used the multiply layer, but this time for the stripes and shadows of her clothes. And here is more line art and refining of the shadows. Few things I did miss in this study of Kuroblood's style is the folds of the clothing and the anthropomorphic face, but I will go over what I observed. Basically, with folds over cylindrical things such as arms and legs, use a zigzag pattern with lots of straight lines for the general flow of the folds, and then go in with the shadows to make them more complicated with Z and Y shapes. And for the anthropomorphic face, I found that it's pretty close to anime portions already, only the human nose is replaced with an animal nose and the mouth part is protruding a little bit more. Back to the actual painting, here I experimented with ways of lighting the image with layer modes. For highlights, there are a bunch of layer modes that can be used to lighten parts of the image, such as color dodge or glue dodge, but it's just up to personal preference and experimentation. I use color dodge and a soft brush for the lightest parts of the image. Now onto the props. To make the crossbow look closer and stand out, I again use thick line art to outline it. And just like for the character, I first used thin lines when redrawing the details in the background, and I rearranged each piece to fill up the space behind. Then I went over the thin lines with thick line art, separating each object on a separate layer so that I can color the line art individually later. I was having a lot of trouble drawing the line art, so what I did was make the window of my drawing program, Clip Studio Paint, bigger, while going into my settings and decreasing my tablet drawing area so that I could draw more with my wrist. I'm pretty sure a lot of people say not to draw with your wrist, but instead to draw with your arm or shoulder because you could get carpal tunnel that way. But every single time I try drawing from my shoulder, I get a lot of cramps, probably because I've dislocated it before. Drawing from my wrist actually did help me have a lot more control over my lines, if you have trouble drawing with pressure-sensitive brushes like me. Something else I really like about Kuroblood's illustrations are these stylized words, so I made my own with the name of the character I'm drawing, Blue Poison. It fills up some space with some good density. Using the analogous colors in mind, I then colored the props one by one. I just filled in the flats and then the dark shadows. I think they came out better than I expected. As long as you use the soft brush to make gradients in empty areas like the bright part of the bench, I think it will turn out looking cohesive. For example, I felt that the inside of the suitcase was a little bit empty as well, so I made a simple gradient with a soft brush and it looked okay to me. I think coloring the line art is also really important. I thought the punching bag was going to look really bad until I changed the letter outline to a purple, which matched with the color scheme, and suddenly it looked good. and the plants really popped once I put a bright outline and some shadows. For the frog plushies, yeah, they don't really look like frogs. I don't really have anything to say here, I just wanted to draw cute plushies. And I chose not to render the balloon lettering too much, so the density of the detail matched the rest of the image. This texture is used to separate the character from the background in Kuroblood's work, so I wanted to replicate it. Since I already have pixel art dithering brushes, I just enlarged the pattern and used a soft brush and a layer mask like I used in this video. And for the final touches, I added some swirls of water to fill some negative space on the left side, and added some bright colors for the reflections on the drops. A few changes to the shadows. Done. Here is the final painting. And here are all of my study notes condensed if you want to try drawing something like this for yourself. Obviously, there are lots of errors in my illustration with anatomy and lighting, but I'm slowly trying to practice short anatomy studies in between making pieces, because that way I can integrate what I learned into actual drawings without losing the motivation to draw. I do also really like Kuroblood's more thin-lined style with more detailed folds and shadows in the background, so one day I might do a part 2 on that. I guess this was a simple intro to layer modes if you've never tried them. You really just have to experiment with different colors to find what suits your drawing. But once you get the gist of how layer modes work, you can kind of tell when it's being used in certain game art styles. So I think that's pretty cool. I changed up this video format since I thought it would be easier to show what I'm taking from my notes during the actual drawing, but what do you think? Is the flow in this one better, or do you prefer all the notes in the beginning? Thanks for watching. See ya!